Hello, everybody. We'll be starting very soon. We'll just wait for a few more attendees to join. Give it a few more seconds. Nice to see so many people with us. Well, let's begin. So, hi everybody, and welcome to the first of our Pearson English Assessment Summer Sessions. So every Tuesday throughout the summer, this series will explore many different aspects of English language assessment, how we at Pearson English approach the question of assessment, and how assessment can be used to support and drive success at each stage of the proficiency journey. Today's webinar is the role of assessment in today's digital learning journey, and we'll be hearing from Nick Laul, who is Pearson's Vice President of Product Management and Delivery for English Assessment. Nick is responsible for developing assessment solutions for what we term low and mid-stakes English assessments to serve the needs of our customers all around the world. He brings over 20 years of assessment expertise in various roles and disciplines. So just some quick housekeeping before we get started. We'll be having a short Q&A session towards the end of this webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions in the question box at any time during the talk. The webinar will be recorded and available shortly after the session in case you'd like to share it or watch it again. And you'll also receive a certificate of attendance via email afterwards. So now I'm happy to pass over to Nick.
Thank you, Sophia. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So like Sophia said, my name is Nick Laul. I lead the English Proficiency Assessment Product Management team. And I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the Midwest United States. So it's awfully early in the morning. I'm an early guy, so that's not a problem. But you can probably see behind me, it's quite dark. And maybe by the end of this webinar, we will have a little bit of sunlight coming through the windows. And then thank you, Sophia. Sophia is based in London, and she's going to be hopefully collecting lots of questions coming from you so we can have a really good and engaging discussion after the fact. So thank you for joining me. I know it is the start of summer for all of you, or most of you at least. COVID is having a pretty substantial impact on all our lives, be it our professional lives, our personal lives, and I hope you're all staying safe. I hope your families are safe. Please take care of each other and your communities, and hopefully we'll get through this together and be different people coming out of it. Right? We've learned so much along the way. Some of us are picking up new skills. We're doing things differently. It's been a pretty rewarding and rich experience, just in terms of seeing how our colleagues, customers, and students are adapting to the ever-changing world. So I'm kicking off our assessment summer series, and today I'm going to be talking about the role of assessment. So hopefully by the end of today, you will leave with a few nuggets. And the first really is about understanding what are proficiency assessments and how they're used. Give you a sense for how they work, what are the different types of assessments, but then at the same time start talking about how that innovation is being embedded throughout the assessment process and what that really means for you as teachers, administrators, institution owners, and heads. And then I do want to spend a few minutes talking about what is the right assessment for your needs. What are the kinds of questions you should be asking? What are the considerations you should put forth, right? So that's really important because many times selecting the right assessment is really at the heart of what we need to do before a student takes the test. And along the way, you will get a preview of our other sessions. So we have a rich series of webinars for you. I think there's 11 of them over the next 2 months. And along the way, I'll give you a sense for what is being covered in our assessment series. So before we get started, let's do a poll. We have 500 plus attendees. And what Sophia is going to do is put up a poll, and let's and you get to answer, what region are you from? Sorry, I only had 5 choices. I wish I had a little bit more granularity, but please, if you can select one of the 5 choices, that'd be great. And we're going to leave it open for about 10 or 15 seconds.
So the results of that were, we have 2% from North America or Caribbean, 8% Central or South America, 36% of you come from Europe or Africa, the largest portion, 53% from Asia or the Middle East, and 0% from Australia.
Okay, excellent. So yes, I understand it's early in the morning for our colleagues in North America, but I'm glad so many people are able to join. And let's learn a little bit about the institution you represent. So are you from a private language school, college or university, K-12 program, or something else? Just gives us a sense of who's attending this webinar today.
So we can see the results there, 25% from college or university, equal first with 25% K-12 program, 22% from private language school, 7% from adult professional education program, and 22% from other.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone for participating. It gives us a good representation of all the different and varied types of institutions you represent. So let's get into the meat of the session today. So let's talk about what are proficiency assessments. And the way we describe proficiency assessments are course agnostic standardized assessments, right? So and it's important because what we're trying to measure as part of a proficiency assessment is an independent measure of what's actually done in the class, right? So no matter what courseware you're using, whether it's it's from one of the publishing companies, whether it's something you developed, regardless of what the way the student is learning, what pedagogical approach you're using, the goal of our proficiency assessments is to provide an integrated skills measure of somebody's ability to use English. They're generally of a summative nature. They're a little bit longer, they're a little bit more rigorous, but what's important is that they're a standardized test. And that is really critical because it gives you great confidence. So when you are measuring it, no matter whether you are a student taking the test, regardless of the country they're in, regardless of the situation they're in, we're actually using a global standard to measure somebody's proficiency in English. And one of the reasons a lot of institutions use this is it's greater confidence, right? Because it's a third-party tool, it is standardized, right? So there's lots of data that's been collected about item performance, student performance, and we've developed the profile of the assessment based on a global pool of students. So course agnostic in this thing is a good thing. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this sits alongside any other assessments you do in the classroom, whether it's the formative assessments you are doing, whether it's course-based, end of chapter, end of unit type assessments you're doing, right? Because those are covering what you've taught or what you've studied or what you're delivering as part of your instruction. What this is doing is providing you an independent way to measure somebody's ability to use English. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what we call proficiency assessments and the way they are currently used. Now let's talk a little bit about the types of assessment. So when we think about our assessment portfolio within Pearson English, we categorize them in 4 buckets, right? So we call them place, benchmark, certify, and verify. And they really correspond, each of the buckets really corresponds to the goal and the reason for delivering or taking the assessment, right? So place is all about placement, right? Getting people off to a flying start by putting them in the right English class or knowing what level they're at. And obviously that is critical, right? As we know, being in the education business, that you want to make sure that you are putting students in a situation where they can succeed. And having the right level of English is a really important gauge and measure for that. Next, we go to what we call our benchmark category, right? So these are a little bit more longer, more rigorous assessments, and they're all for measuring progress and showing proficiency, right? So that as you're using courseware, as your students are learning English, what you're doing along the way is embedding these standardized assessments along the way, and the information that you garner back from that really talks about, is the student learning? Are they making progress? Are they able to use the skills and use the proficiency that they've been taught as part of the courseware? And then the 2 categories on the right are certify and verify. And these are what we would call high stakes certified assessments. And high stakes is sometimes a word that gets thrown around quite often, right? And in this case, what we're referring to really is about the security and the test center channel or the model in which the test is delivered, right? So in either case, because it is a certificate, an internationally recognized certificate that you receive, be it for verify, as an example, which is our PTE, Pearson Test of English portfolio, which is used for high stakes immigration study abroad purposes, where you are taking a test and you are spending 2.5 hours in a test center being invigilated or monitored with high security, because these stakes and the certificate has significant value for immigration study abroad purposes. So those categories, certify and verify, are all about providing a internationally recognized certificate. Now, what's interesting about this portfolio is as you go from left to right, generally the test length increases, right? So when you're trying to place somebody, it's a relatively short test because you want to be able to place at scale, right? So you don't want to spend hours trying to assess every student. But as you go further to the right, you want to make sure that the test has lots of assessment items, lots of different types of items, so you can actually gauge to a high degree of certainty somebody's English language proficiency. And correspondingly, obviously, the price increases, right? And we'll talk about why this is important. Like I mentioned towards the end of the webinar, the second half of the webinar is all about selecting the right test. And this will give you a sense for the kind of questions you should be asking and things you should consider when determining what type of test you want to deliver. So one more poll. So you will see polls have been embedded throughout the presentation today. So just want to get a sense for do you and how do you use third-party proficiency and course agnostic assessments today? So are you using for placement and entrance, progress monitoring, and so on and so forth, or you're not using them, or you develop your own?
So we can see there by far the biggest percentage we have there is progress monitoring. 21% don't develop your own assessments or don't use proficiency assessments. 14% use assessments for exit or summative testing, and a joint 13% use assessment for placement or high stakes or certification testing.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. So that's good to see, right? I mean, there is no right or wrong answer. These are the different ways the proficiency assessments are used. So it's good to see people are using them for a variety of purposes. And we'll talk a little bit more about, like I said, how you select the right test. So I want to talk a little bit about innovation today. But I've been in this role for just over 2.5 years. And a couple of years back, kind of through a lot of kind of interrogation and spending time with customers and students and institutions, we started to get a sense for what's important to them. And using that information, we developed what we call our product development framework. And this is important because this is all about how do we ensure that the products we're building actually meet the needs of our customers, right? And meet the needs of students, parents, institutions, employers. There's lots of stakeholders along the way. And what we've done is we've come up with these 5 big buckets. And any innovation or product improvement that we do really falls into these different areas. So this philosophy is important because all the benefits, and I'll talk about some of this innovation that's happening, really accrue along those 5 pillars. We'll talk a little bit about how this plays really into product development and what's actually happening in the place, but access and availability is all about making sure that the products are available in the right formats, at the right place, in the right time, and maximizing people to avail of the product, but also make sure that we're providing the right accommodations for people that might have disabilities or learning challenges. And so that's where access and availability really comes in. The next one is about product fit and quality of implementation. And the second half of the webinar is really all about product fit. It's about making sure that we are selecting and we're enabling that the right product is selected for the right purpose, and that the inferences drawn from those, the output is correct, right? Because the last thing you want is deliver the wrong product and make the wrong judgment, and that results in an adverse impact to the student. The third one is all about fast and fair scoring decisions, right? Anything we do has to be fair to the student. We deliver millions of tests within Pearson English every year. We need to make sure that there's consistency in the scores. We have to make sure that no matter what time of day or what place the student is taking the test, that they are receiving a fair score, because someone or the other is drawing an inference and making a judgment on that score. At the same time, we also realize and recognize that speed is critical, right? People want data, people want information. We cannot take weeks and weeks to provide meaningful information about student results. So how do we balance the need for fairness along with providing quick results? Now, a lot of the innovation that's happening is around digital assessment. And with digital assessment, one of the big benefits is you get tremendous amount of data. But it's not data for the sake of data. It's data to actually help measure, track, and compare. So how are we able to provide that data to institutions, to educators, to hiring managers, as an example, to help them quickly make a decision about the student taking the assessment? And the last piece is all about how we're going to impact learning, right? Assessments are only as good as the impact they have on the student or the learner. So how do we enable the data, the rich data that's coming out of the assessment, to really help personalize and drive learning in the classroom? So these are the kind of 5 themes that we use for our product development framework. We think about this all the time. This is how we hold ourselves accountable. Hopefully these themes resonate with kind of the needs that you have. And as we go through the webinar this morning, you will see how these themes are touched on in some of the innovation that's coming out within our portfolio. So let's talk about access and availability. And one of the important things, which is exacerbated by COVID now, is a flexible delivery model, right? So many of us are used to either taking an assessment in the classroom or taking an assessment maybe at home, or for high stakes testing actually going into a test center. Well, the reality has changed, right, over the last 3 months. What we launched recently was what we're calling remote proctoring or remote monitoring. And this is for our Versant suite of products. So Versant is one of our most popular tests today. It's used both in the corporate and the higher education space for progress monitoring and for entrance testing. What's great about Versant is that it's flexible in its delivery. It's web-based, it's offline, or you can even take some of our tests on a mobile app. We have speaking tests, we have writing tests, and we have 4 skills tests. But historically, each institution that is delivering the Versant test really determines how they want to deliver it. Is it delivered physically in a location of their choice, or is it taken from home? What we did about a month back is we launched remote monitoring or remote proctoring within the Versant portfolio. So that adds an extra layer of security so that if you are having students take this test from home, you have greater confidence around how the test is being taken and the conditions in which it's taken. Now, the great thing about this remote monitoring solution is that it requires very little human intervention. All of it is AI based, and the AI engine flags aberrant behavior. So what you can see on the right is other people walking into the frame, or there might be things that are suspicious where the student's photograph at the beginning of the test doesn't match what's happening in the middle of the test. And what the AI engine does is it flags it and calls it suspicious. So the administrator or the institution can make a determination as to whether it's a reasonable test attempt that they should accept or whether they should reject it because of the condition in which it was taken. So I'm not going to get into too much of it today, but if you do want to learn more about remote monitoring and the Versant English placement test and how this is really embedded within the Versant portfolio, please join us on July 14th. So we have 11 other webinars that are, or 10 other webinars throughout this this summer series. And what I'm giving you a flavor of is the kind of things that you will see along the way. But part of access and availability is also about having a more engaging assessment, right? So with our new generation of learners, we want to make sure that that assessment isn't something they fear, right? Assessment is something that they embrace as part of their learning and development journey. One of the things we've launched recently, well, recently as in a year and a half back, is a tablet-based assessment called English Benchmark Young Learners. Now, this is also about access. This is about access because this is a product for young learners, right? So if you are a 6, 7, 8-year-old, as an example, you don't want to spend an hour taking what people consider a traditional assessment, right? If we can gather more information in a much more fun, engaging, gamified way, everyone wins. And that's what English Benchmark Young Learners is, right? It's a tablet-based assessment. It's an integrated 4 skills assessment, so we're capturing speaking and written proficiency along the way as well. But students feel like they're playing a game, right? It's drag and drop. You're speaking into the microphone. You are responding and having a conversation with the animated character on the screen. It is an incredibly rich and rewarding experience for students. I was in China when it first launched. It was incredible to see students, right? I mean, within a period of 30 to 40 minutes, they're done with the assessment. They think they're playing a game. But what we've captured is incredibly powerful information about their English proficiency, and the teachers now have instant scoring, literally instant. So the moment the student is done with the test, they get a 4-skill score and really rich, powerful reporting to go along with it so that the teachers can actually have an impact on the learning and the English attainment of the students. So if you want to learn more about how this Young Learners product is being used both to direct and refine teaching, or just to learn more about the product, there are 2 webinars coming up in early August, so do join us for that. Now, both these assessments that I just talked about, the Versant English Placement Test, as well as English Benchmark Young Learners, use our AI scoring engine to score speech. Now that might be novel, the first many of you might have heard of it. But the real benefit of that is that capability, which is now being embedded in nearly all our English assessments, provides quite a few benefits to teachers and students. The first and probably the most obvious one is instant score turnaround, right? So the idea being that you could have 10,000 people take a Pearson test today and nearly instantly receive a score. And it's incredibly powerful if you are a teacher or an institution trying to capture that information and make judgments based on that data, right? So whether it's for hiring, because Pearson is used in the corporate space quite a bit, you don't want to wait half hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, a day or two to make a hiring decision if you don't have to. Whether it's placement, right? If you have students coming in and you want to place them in the right class, if you can get meaningful information right away, why wait a day or two or three days to get the right information? And that's what the AI scoring capability provides. But probably more importantly, it removes bias, right? And that is super critical. The AI engine doesn't get tired, right? So whether it's early in the morning, late at night, whether you don't have to worry about whether Nick Laul is scoring it or Sophia Fergus is scoring it, and Sophia might be more generous in her scoring, or Nick's had a bad day and he's underscoring students. You don't have to worry about that, and you don't have to worry about any implicit or explicit human bias that might come in when someone is interacting with a student, and that is super critical, right? So that when you are delivering this test, no matter where it is in the world, no matter who is taking it, you will have a consistent and a standardized score across the world. And that's the level of confidence that the AI scoring capability brings. This is not new for Pearson English. We've been delivering this capability for over a dozen years. We deliver millions of tests a year using this, and we have loads of data and confidence in the score that we produce. There's an excellent webinar coming up on September 8th. If you would like to join and learn more about AI's place in education and language assessment. So I have one more poll. What's your comfort level in using AI to deliver and score assessments today? So we talked about a couple of different uses this morning. Talked about AI's use for remote monitoring and AI's use for in scoring and speech recognition. How do you feel about that?
So very interesting results. A majority of people feeling not comfortable today, but open to it in the future. Somewhat comfortable comes next, 28%. Completely comfortable, not many comparatively completely comfortable on 13%.
Okay,
and
excellent. Yeah. In many ways, it's not surprising, right? Because AI is a loaded term, right? So it means a lot of things to a lot of people. And so I'd encourage you to join the session. I think it was September 8th, I believe. Yeah. So I encourage you to join that session and really learn more about it. And David will talk about how we program our AI engine and so on and so forth. And hopefully some of it is all about kind of increasing the level of knowledge and confidence that people have within the use of AI. Okay, so let's talk about data. So I'm a data geek. I'm an engineer by background, so I actually love data. It's not something that scares me, but data is important because what we're measuring in assessment is only as good as the information we can produce out of it, right? So the benefit of digital assessment is we can collect loads of data. We collect loads of information about a student. So how do we make it useful in the classroom? And one of the key development philosophies that we have is about allowing for more data to be made available to the teacher and the institution. And not data where you get loads of information in a big Excel file and you have to do what you want out of it. It's synthesized data. It's data that we have taken based on the assessment, based on information from teachers and administrators, and put it in a usable format, right? Be it rich data for class or student or institutions, or personalized data at a student level so that they can actually see what are their strengths and weaknesses, how they can make improvements. Long-term tracking and progression is only possible using this data, right? And by making this available, we are able to give more confidence and greater information so that you are not just looking at a score and making judgments based on the score when all of the richness actually resides underneath the score. Now, we have 2 new tests that recently came out, level and benchmark for secondary and adult learners. And a lot of the data elements that I just referred to and some of the reporting that I'm talking about is embedded fully into those assessments. If you want to learn more about those assessments and how data is being leveraged, please join us on July 28th to learn about level and benchmark. So I believe this is my last poll. So hopefully you haven't got too tired of that yet. So let's talk about data. Do you collect and have access to sufficient data today?
So interesting there. We have an equal, pretty much equal between yes, lots of data and no, not enough data. And a minority of people either don't need it or have lots of data, but not usable data.
Okay, no, thank you, Sophia. And I think it's the second piece there, the 17% that they say they have lots of data, but it's not usable or useful. And I think that's where we really need to have an impact because the data that is being collected generally should be usable and useful. And if not, then the data should not be collected. So I'm hoping that you're starting to get a sense for how data can actually be leveraged within the assessment framework. The last and most important thing for us is how do we improve student performance, right? So we don't deliver assessments for the sake of delivering assessments, right? Assessments are there as an important measurement and teaching tool, right? And I said teaching, and teaching is important because in many cases, what we look at, or what a lot of people look at, is the number, right? Did I get a 48? Did I get a 52? Did I get a 22? Many times that is the least important information and the least useful information on a score report. The power is in the detail behind it. What does the number mean? How do I interpret it? And how do I improve it? That's what improving student performance is about, right? So when we talk about the data, when I mentioned data in the last slide, that data is being collected to personalize and improving learning and teacher effectiveness, right? So as an example, what you're seeing on the right side is a graphic of one of the score reports we provide, where we really not only, in that case, the listening score of 20 something, right? That's great, but what does it actually mean? What is the student able to do? What is a performance summary? And then along the way, what are the recommended activities? What are the lessons that the student should be focusing on? That's where the power of learning comes in. That's where the power of our assessments come in, is to try and enable teachers to really understand at a snapshot, both at the class level and at an individual student level, what are the strengths and weaknesses, right? So we've had institutions that have 30 or 40 students within a class, and they get a summary report of their classes' strengths and weaknesses. And what the teacher is able to do almost instantaneously is evaluate that data and make kind of amendments in what he or she is teaching, what her focus areas are, what are we going to do to drive improvement. And that happens both at a class level, but also at a student level, so we can personalize learning so that students that are strong in listening don't have to focus as much time on listening activities. They can do more speaking or writing activities where they might be weaker. So it's all about leveraging that data. And if you want to learn more about how we're using digital assessment to direct and refine the teaching of young learners as an example, and that concept applies to secondary and adult learners as well, because this level of detail and richness is available in all assessments that we deliver. Please join us on August 4th. Now, all of this is only possible because we have something called the global scale of English, right? So this is a granular scale of English which extends the common European framework. It provides the granularity, the corresponding learning objectives, and the richness that we need to really understand and determine what students know at what level and what should they need to learn in order to be able to effectively do X, Y, or Z. It's a great way to track proficiency and progress, right? So we are able to provide you the score on a standardized basis, but all of the richness that I just talked about, the activities, the summary descriptors, is all possible because of the global scale of English. I think many people have already heard of the global scale of English. It is very, very popular, at least with people that are familiar with Pearson English. But if you're not, or if you'd like to learn more or like to engage in a great conversation about the global scale of English and how it's supporting teaching and assessment, please join us in 3 weeks' time on July 21st. So hopefully the last 30-35 minutes, you've got a great sense of what product development philosophies we have. And hopefully kind of some of those resonate with you, that the things that the way we think about bringing product to market on the assessment front are things that you care about, that you think are meaningful to impact the way you are measuring, assessing, and improving the teaching and learning of English. Let's switch gears for the last 5 or 10 minutes and talk about selecting the right assessment. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have kind of 4 categories of assessment, right? So place, benchmark, certify, and verify. And what I tell people is all our English assessments, so we have over a dozen assessments, right, within English, Pearson English. They all do the same thing, right? They all measure English. Now, there are certain nuances, right? The test construct might be different, the measurement properties might be slightly different, but they all do a really darn good job of measuring English. So what's the difference? How do you pick the right assessment for your need? And if you leave with something today, I hope you leave with what factors you should consider when selecting an assessment. So these are the kind of questions you should ask yourself, and these are the questions you should ask companies or other institutions that are delivering or developing assessments for you, right? So the first really is about test construct, right? What is it measuring? So at the very basic, is it measuring general English, or is it measuring business or professional English? Are the situations within the assessment more focused towards travel and going out to eat or family as in general English, or is it focused on dealing with customers or dealing with tricky situations and negotiations more on the business English side? So test construct is one factor you should consider. The second one, which is super critical, is test length, right? So many times we are restricted by a period that we have, right? A classroom period of 30 or 40 or 50 minutes, or that I only have 10 minutes with a student and I need to evaluate them. So test length has a significant impact on scores and measurement, right? So I'll give you an example. If I were to have a conversation with somebody, and let's assume I have 2 minutes, and I'm able to talk to them for 2 minutes and give them some activities, but I'm only able to do that for 2 minutes, and as a result, collect 2 or 3 data points, and on the basis of that, I am giving them an assessment score. That is quite problematic, right? Versus me spending 2.5 hours giving them a load of different activities and different types of things to do, and as a result, on the basis of that, providing a score, right? So test length has a direct impact on measurement and the confidence we have in giving scores. And you will see that, right? As you attend our different webinars, you will see that once we have longer tests, we provide a lot more richness of data. We have a shorter test. We certainly provide lots of data. We certainly make judgments, but we're a little bit more cautious about doing that because we don't want students to be negatively impacted by making a substantial incorrect evaluation within a period of 10 or 15 minutes. The delivery model is super important, right? So is it paper or is it computer? We have large institutions that want to deliver tests for 5 or 10,000 people on the same day. Now that is a challenging thing to do if you want to do a digital assessment, right? So is paper the right thing for that situation? Or would you rather have a 3-week period of delivering assessments more on an on-demand basis, which allows computer delivery and digital delivery, right? So these are all push and pulls, right? There is no right or wrong answer. It's all about what are things that are important to you, and along the way, what do you sacrifice by going a direction, right? So if you go paper, you get certain benefits, but if you go digital, you get other benefits. Channel, right? So channel is all about the situation in which the test is taken. Is it in a test center? Is it in a standardized test center? What level of security practices exist, right? So as an example, you can take a uber high stakes test like PT Academic, and you have hundreds of locations where you can take that, right? And you have really stringent security, which requires passports, and we collect your photograph and so on and so forth. But if you want to take it anywhere and everywhere, that is not the right test for you, right? Then you have other tests like Pearson as an example that you could take, which certainly you give up something on security, but you get other benefits, and you have to determine what you're willing to trade off for to get more access at the cost of lower security, as an example. And the last two are all about outcome and risk, right? So what are you measuring as part of that test? What are you trying to get out of that result? How is the output going to be used? And then what is your appetite for risk, right? What is your appetite if somebody either cheats or you get it wrong, right? What is the risk of doing that? And depending on certain institutions, you might say, you know what, if I'm off by a little bit on my scores, or if somebody games the system, no harm, no foul. But in the case of immigration, as an example, or high stakes assessment, that is a pretty big deal. So we've got institutions that kind of are willing to give up and have a higher risk profile because they care more about price and access versus others that are basically saying, you know what, risk is something I'm not willing to take at all. The risk of malpractice is too high. The stakes are too high. So you can willing to pay more for it and willing to have lower access. And obviously the last one is price and affordability. Obviously, as security goes up, the test length goes up, and so on and so forth, the price goes up as well. And once again, these are the kind of factors you should consider. These are all push and pull. So think about what are things that are important to you and your institution, and accordingly, it'll help you hopefully pick the right test. So that is the crux of the webinar. So it is summer for most of you. I know not for everyone. I know we have no one from Australia, but we certainly have people where it isn't summer or doesn't feel like summer. So either you could be doing that, or you can join us, right? So we have a host of other webinars coming up every week from now until early September. And you've got a sense of what those are, right? Whether it's things like remote monitoring, the global scale of English, learning about how you're using digital assessment to drive teaching and refine learning for young learners, PT General, a certified test, PT Academic, how we're enabling teachers to better prepare students for PT Academic. And obviously the last but not the least is AI and how it is being used in education and language assessment. So I would encourage you to register for some, if not all of them. Hopefully today has been a rewarding 45 minutes. But if you would like to register, that is the short form for the registration for the rest of our webinars. And now I will open it up for questions.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, so we've got a good few questions in here. A few about AI. Somebody's asked, at which level can AI-based tests be used?
Yeah, so our AI engine is being used across the spectrum, right? So it is used for young learners, and it's used for secondary and adult learners as well. It's used whether you're using business English construct, general English, or academic English construct. So just, I'm not going to spend too much time discussing AI, but our AI engine is programmed using humans, right? So not just the underlying technical infrastructure, but also how it scores assessments. And essentially what it does is we feed in human scored assessments. And based on that, the AI engine scales and learns how to score automatically. So it's not some computer just scoring arbitrarily. It is fed in information about what a good response looks like, what a poor response looks like. And it's not, it doesn't just look at the very periphery, right? It doesn't look at the edge and say, you know, I'm going to do word count or what keywords are used and so on and so forth. It's a richer analysis of someone's English language capabilities. And the AI engine is able to collect many more data points than a human engine can, as an example, or a human can as part of the assessment. And therefore, it is able to evaluate the integrated skills in a great fashion. So I'll go back to the September 8th presentation. If you want to learn more and talk to David, please join us on September 8th, and you can talk AI in more detail with him.
This is an interesting one. Does the test length affect the reliability of the test?
So it does not affect reliability, right? So what it does affect is the robustness of and the confidence in the score, right? So anytime you measure something, right? So reliability in terms of what the assessment reliability term means versus the confidence in the exactness of and the preciseness of the score. So whenever we measure something, right, there is something called error, right? Error that creeps in as part of the measurement process, right? So as an example, I asked somebody 3 questions and they answer those questions. Well, they could just be guessing and they might have got them right? Well, that's error, as an example. If you spend 10 minutes assessing somebody, you get some error along the way. So when you say the score is X, the score is never X, right? The score is always X plus or minus something. And that's the truth of anything that you measure, right? Be it your credit score, be it any other information that is collected or judgments that you're making on that behalf. As you increase test length, our confidence in that score goes up, right? And so therefore, if you look at our level test as an example, because it's a short test and because it's used for placement purposes, we don't provide a precise score, right? We provide a band, because for the purposes of leveling or placing students, all we need is a band, or what teachers need is a band. And what we don't want to do is provide a precise score when the reality is that if you took a longer test, we'd have more confidence in that score. And that's just the truth of assessment, right? So this is nothing specific to Pearson. This is just a truth to measurement. And it's not just assessment related. Anything you measure has a level of error. And what you want to do is minimize the adverse impact so that you're not using any error in the assessment process or in the measurement process to make incorrect decisions. Hope that answers the question. Otherwise, do feel free to reach out.
There's another question here around shifting from more traditional paper-based assessment onto AI-based online assessment. This question asker says that they expect it will take months or years to make that shift. And is there any way that we can sort of hasten that process along?
Yeah, I think the question really is, no, I think that's fair, because I think in different situations, we see kind of institutions making a much more swifter approach to getting digital up and running, and others that aren't. I think the question really is to understand what barriers you're facing, right? So as an example, some of the barriers that we face sometimes with regulatory agencies or government agencies is they're concerned about digital because they believe it is either unfair, not accessible, so on and so forth, not reliable, and they don't understand it, right? So I think the question really is about why do you want to make the move, right? There is no right answer as to why you have to make the move. As an example, right? So we have a large corporate customer that uses our assessments to hire people. They need and they do this globally, right? So they hire hundreds of thousands of people a year, and they need to have a single English assessment standard, and they need to deliver it any day of the year when they need to do it, and they want a score nearly instantaneously so they can decide whether they move people into the hiring process or not. Now, in that situation, a digital assessment that returns scores quickly is really, really important, right? On the other hand, many of our traditional customers that use, many of our customers that use traditional paper and pencil assessments may not have a need to get scores right away because their entrance process happens once a year in the summer. Now, obviously, a lot of those things are changing. So I would ask you and encourage you to think about what are the key reasons you want to make the switch? What are the key benefits you'd like to accrue? What are things that you'd like to get that you're not getting today? I think that's one way to hasten the switch, is to try and understand the big benefits that you, your institutions, your students, and your administrators see, and use that as a way to propel the need for change.
Someone's asking here about individual learners. They're saying, isn't it important to understand learners' backgrounds, their diverse needs, and at times be empathetic and subjective before feeding data into machines and making value judgments?
You're absolutely correct. And one of the things that is super critical for our AI engine, I think that's, I'm assuming that question relates to the use of AI and making sure that the inferences or the scoring engine takes into account the diverse backgrounds, accents, and learning needs of our customers. Absolutely. So one of the critical things that we do is when we program the AI engine, as an example, it doesn't just take Nick Laul and Nick Laul's profile of a student and programs it, right? Our process is to gather information from a global pool, right? So if you look at our assessment, our AI engine today, we score millions of tests all over the world using that, right? And so it's about making sure that the scoring engine and the data that we're putting in is actually on the basis of what our customer needs are, right? So if we have young learners from all over the world taking this assessment, the AI programming is based on that profile and the distribution of students. So it's not just we're taking American or British or Australian students, native English speakers, and saying, that's my profile of an English learner, and that's the scoring engine. Not at all, right? Our scoring engine is based on the inputs from a global perspective. I think that was the question. If not, please clarify.
And somebody's asked about students with dyslexia. Do you think this would impact their performance? And how would we mitigate that?
Yeah, so that's an important conversation we're having. And some of our assessments do a better job addressing students with disabilities and learning challenges more than others. To be honest, right, I mean, that's where the flexibility of delivery comes in, right? So it's not a one size fits all, right? So if a student has dyslexia or some other form of learning disability or an impairment, what is the right assessment model to help evaluate the English capabilities? So it's not about necessarily shoving a type of assessment down their throat. It's about making sure that we have a menu of options, and based on the student's particular situation. It's not just learning disabilities, right? It could just be somebody has never had access to technology, right? They don't have access to technology, even though we might love assessment to be digital, or you might love it because of the data it provides. The student's not going to be comfortable doing that. So how do you mitigate the error that creeps in because you have somebody using digital assessments for the first time that has no access to computers in the past? So yes, I think it's definitely about addressing dyslexia, learning disabilities, but also going back to what the other person said about making sure that we're taking into account the various backgrounds and situations that each of our learners is faced with before we send them down a particular path of assessment or learning.
We've probably got time for another one or two. Children, there's a few questions around how we can prepare children, particularly very young children, for this digital era. And then other questions around how we might, how best to assess their oral skills, for example.
Yeah, so there's a great webinar about that because we've got some really great experience doing this for young learners, digital assessment, integrated 4 skills assessment. So there's a webinar on August 4th. So I'd encourage you to do that. I think for, once again, it depends on the situation, but at least in many of the markets where we deliver assessments and English language products, a lot of the young learners are quite familiar with the use of technology, right? And more so when it comes to tablets than it is to a keyboard, as an example. So I think, and that was part of the rationale for delivering a tablet-based and developing a tablet-based assessment, because it felt more natural for young learners, right? So their comfort kind of dragging and dropping and pointing and clicking and interacting with an iPad, as an example, felt more natural to them than either doing paper and pencil or even typing on a keyboard. So once again, that doesn't necessarily mean every student everywhere in the world is capable of doing that, but for a large majority of students that we serve, that seems like a logical way to assess them. But I recommend August 4th is a great session. So to actually dive into depth on what we've seen and what we've learned along the way, I encourage you to join that.
Maybe just one last one very quickly. How to assess the average abilities of students across a class? Sorry, yeah, it's a big question for a space of time, sorry.
No, I understood. So essentially, right, and that's where, going back to where proficiency assessments come in, right? Because that's what proficiency assessments are doing, is it's using a standardized measure to evaluate either a single student or a large group of students, sorry. And so what proficiency assessments, whether it be a benchmark test or a Pearson test as an example, is delivered to a large group of students. And then the inferences that we're drawing on the basis of that actually provide the richness of data that you need, right? So as an example, our benchmark test that you'll learn about on July 28th, delivered to a group of 30 or 40 students, and within minutes, you get an incredible class profile. And the profile just talks about, yeah, the overall ability, the average abilities, but then what those average abilities actually mean. And as a teacher, what should you be doing differently? What activities you should be focusing on? What lessons plans or units you should be addressing first? And so that's where you're able to take information about the class profile, right, and actually impact learning. But at the same time, you can take the same data with smaller cohorts of groups, right? So you can take, so now that you've kind of developed plans for the whole class, if you have a group of students that are struggling with speaking, right, you can take small cohorts and address them in a different fashion. So it's that data that is enabling you to get a overall class profile, but also personalized learning for either a single student or a group of students.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nick. That was fascinating. And thank you everybody for joining us today. You'll receive a recording of this soon after we close the session, and a certificate will be sent to you as well. Thanks again for taking part. Nick pointed to a number of the sessions that we have coming up. So please take a look at the programme and sign up for whatever looks interesting to you. Every Tuesday throughout the summer we'll be holding these, so hope to see you another one very soon. So we'll close there. Thanks again for coming.
Thanks everyone, take care.
Bye.